What happens when a daughter-in-law kicks her mother-in-law out with a smile, thinking she's won? Evelyn quietly collected proof that could turn everything upside down. What happened next left the entire family stunned. The rain began that morning, slow and steady, tapping softly on the kitchen window as Evelyn washed the breakfast dishes. She moved quietly, as she always did now, her presence shrinking, her steps careful, as if trying not to disturb the peace of a house that was no longer hers. She could hear laughter in the living room. Claire's laughter. Sharp, bright, triumphant. Evelyn glanced at the clock. She had lived in this house for over 20 years. Raised her only son, Mark, within these walls. She remembered birthday banners strung above the stairs, the scent of cinnamon rolls in the oven, the sound of Mark's shoes thumping down the hallway. But now, everything felt different. Now, even her memories seemed to rattle in her chest like old coins in a forgotten purse. Claire was Mark's wife of 5 years, beautiful, poised, and always just a little too polished. She had moved in with wide eyes and a wide smile, all sweetness and gratitude. But over the years, Evelyn had watched that smile become a weapon. Claire knew how to charm a room, how to disarm Mark with a single glance, and, most of all, how to make Evelyn feel small without ever raising her voice. It started subtly. Claire would accidentally misplace Evelyn's mail, or conveniently forget to invite her to family outings. She'd make little jokes at the dinner table, always framed as playful, but each one chipped away at Evelyn's confidence. "Oh, Evelyn, you're so old-fashioned." "Don't worry, Mark, your mother just gets confused sometimes." The others would laugh, never realizing the sting those words left behind. Over the past year, things had escalated. Evelyn's cherished photographs began to disappear from the mantel, replaced by Claire's framed vision board and new, trendy art prints. Family traditions evaporated, Sunday roasts replaced by takeout, Christmas baking abandoned for catered desserts. Mark, busy with work, didn't notice. Or maybe he chose not to. Evelyn had considered leaving before. More than once, she had packed a small bag, only to unpack it again by midnight, unable to abandon the house that was both her sanctuary and her prison. But Claire was no longer satisfied with making Evelyn invisible. She wanted her gone. It was a Thursday when Claire finally made her move. Evelyn was in the garden, kneeling among her roses, when she heard the back door slam. Claire stood on the patio, a thin smile plastered across her lips. "Evelyn, can we talk?" she said, too sweetly. Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron and stood, bracing herself. Claire didn't wait for an answer. She led Evelyn inside, gesturing for her to sit at the kitchen table, Evelyn's own table. Mark was there, looking uncomfortable, eyes fixed on the tabletop. Claire sat opposite Evelyn and leaned forward, voice soft but unyielding. "We think it's time you considered other options," she said. "Maybe it would be nice for you to have your own space. Someplace quieter, with people your own age. We've even looked at a few retirement communities, just in case you want to visit." Evelyn looked from Claire to Mark. Her son only nodded, avoiding her eyes. It felt like the air had been knocked out of her. She nodded, slowly, not trusting herself to speak. But inside, something cold and clear snapped into place. She had known this was coming. She had seen it in every forced smile, every missing heirloom, every new rule about what she could and couldn't do in her own home. But what Claire didn't know was that Evelyn had not been idle. Months ago, after her jewelry box went missing and the antique vase from her grandmother broke, Evelyn began documenting everything. She kept a small notebook in her nightstand, writing down dates, times, incidents. She started taking photos with her old phone, snapping pictures of every change, every suspicious event. She even saved copies of emails and text messages, including a few she found by accident on the shared family computer. At first, it felt foolish, even paranoid. But soon, it felt necessary. Now, as she listened to Claire's generous offer, she remembered the folder tucked beneath the lining of her suitcase. Evidence, receipts of unauthorized purchases on the joint account, screenshots of Claire transferring money to her own account, emails from Claire to her friends mocking Evelyn behind her back, and a voice memo Evelyn had accidentally recorded, in which Claire admitted to Mark that his mother is just in the way. Evelyn excused herself with quiet dignity, returned to her room, and sat on the edge of her bed. She ran her hand over the folder's worn cover, feeling the pulse of her own heartbeat steady and strong. She knew now, She was not powerless. She would not confront Claire yet. That would come later, and it would be on Evelyn's terms. She would continue to play the part of the frail, confused mother-in-law. She would let Claire believe she had won. But Evelyn was waiting, quietly, for the moment to strike. And when she did, she would do so not with anger or accusation, but with proof that would ruin the woman who smiled as she kicked her out. The days after Claire's ultimatum were filled with a peculiar kind of silence, a silence pregnant with tension and secrets. Evelyn moved through her routines as if nothing had changed, quietly cooking breakfast, tidying the sitting room, and caring for her garden. To the outside world, she remained the dutiful mother-in-law. Inside, she was sharper, more alert, seeing every detail in a new light. Claire, emboldened by what she thought was victory, loosened her mask. She called her friends loudly on speakerphone, mocking Evelyn's quirks and discussing the progress of her campaign to free up the house. Evelyn overheard plans for redecorating, conversations about changing the locks, even talk of a new car purchase. "Once the paperwork's all mine," Claire giggled into her phone. Evelyn kept meticulous notes. She observed every minor cruelty, Claire moving her chair to the garage, hiding her medications, and instructing the house cleaner to stop dusting Evelyn's room. Mark noticed little, his attention trapped by mounting work demands and Claire's carefully orchestrated appeals for sympathy. "She's old, Mark. She needs help, but not here," Claire would sigh, a hand on his arm. One afternoon, Evelyn found her late husband's watch missing from her bedside drawer. The watch was the last gift she'd received from him, a keepsake as precious for its memories as its material value. Evelyn checked every possible hiding place, finally spotting it a week later on an online auction page, cleverly listed under a username she recognized from one of Claire's old emails. She printed the listing, added it to her growing folder of evidence, and carefully documented every step she took to recover it. She also made a copy of the email she sent to the auction site and their confirmation that the listing was being investigated. Tension in the house reached a fever pitch when a social worker arrived one morning for a wellness check. Evelyn, startled but composed, answered the door. The visitor asked gentle but pointed questions about her health, safety, and mental state. Evelyn recognized the ploy. Someone was building a case to declare her unfit to live independently. The social worker left with a puzzled smile, assuring Evelyn she seemed perfectly capable. Evelyn, with practiced calm, made tea for herself and for the house cleaner, who quietly confided that Claire had told her to keep an eye out for falls and to report anything unusual. Later, Evelyn found Claire in the sunroom, sipping coffee, smirking over her phone. "Just making sure you're okay, Evelyn," she said, voice dripping with false concern. Evelyn smiled politely and returned to her room, where she added to her file a summary of the visit, the social worker's card, and the house cleaner's confession. She even wrote a letter to her attorney, briefly outlining her suspicions, and mailed it by hand at the post office. That evening, Mark told her there would be a family meeting on Sunday to discuss what's best for everyone. Evelyn nodded, making no protest, and quietly took her folder from its hiding place. She laid out the evidence, checked and cross-checked her notes, and added one final detail, a recording, this time, of Claire on the phone with her sister. "If she goes, everything is finally mine. All of it. Mark will thank me later." Evelyn's hands were steady as she closed the folder. She was tired, but not afraid. For the first time in years, she felt in control of her own fate. No matter what happened in that meeting, she was ready. Claire's arrogance had become her blind spot. Evelyn's patience had become her shield. And soon, one woman's cruelty would meet another woman's truth. Sunday arrived gray and tense. Evelyn woke early, moving quietly about her room, reviewing every piece of her carefully compiled folder before the sun had crested the rooftops. She placed everything in order, printouts, notes, photographs, receipts, recordings, then slid the folder into her purse. Her hands did not tremble. In the kitchen, Mark sipped coffee, eyes shadowed from a week of restless sleep. Claire was dressed as if for church, in a crisp blue dress, her hair perfectly arranged. She was all concern and composure, preparing breakfast with elaborate hospitality. "We'll all feel better once things are sorted," she chirped, setting out fresh fruit and pastries. Evelyn took her seat and waited, watching Mark try to avoid anyone's gaze. The silence at the table felt thick, a rope pulling everyone taut. After the dishes were cleared, Claire cleared her throat, launching into her well-rehearsed speech. "Evelyn, "We're worried about you," she began. "It's not safe for you here anymore. You forget things, you're isolated, you fall behind on bills. Mark and I think you would be happier and safer in a community that can give you proper care." She glanced at Mark, seeking backup. He nodded, not meeting Evelyn's eyes. Evelyn listened, her expression composed. She let Claire's accusations accumulate, each one building on the last, until the room felt ready to burst. Only when Claire's words began to falter did Evelyn speak. "I'm glad you want to talk honestly," she said quietly. "Because I do too." She pulled her folder from her purse and placed it on the table. Claire's smile faltered for the first time. Mark looked up, confused. "I'd like to share my perspective," Evelyn continued. She opened the folder, taking out the documents one by one. First, the emails, Claire's mocking words, her manipulation of family finances. Then, the printout of the auction listing for the stolen watch, and the reply from the auction site. Evelyn laid out receipts for unauthorized purchases, photographs of changed locks and missing photos, and the summary of the social worker's visit. Last, she pressed play on a recording, Claire's voice, clear as day, discussing her plan to push Evelyn out and seize the house for herself. The silence in the room became absolute. Claire's face blanched, her mouth opening, then closing without a word. Mark stared, disbelieving, at the mountain of evidence. "Claire," he finally managed, voice cracking. But Claire had no answer. Her composure evaporated, replaced by stammering denial and desperate justifications. She insisted Evelyn was confused, the documents were taken out of context, the recording was misinterpreted. The more she spoke, the less convincing she became. Evelyn remained steady. "I never wanted conflict. I only wanted to be respected in my own home. I have not been confused. I have been patient." Mark's shoulders slumped. He looked at Evelyn with a kind of shame that seemed to age him years in seconds. The meeting ended not with a shouting match, but with silence, heavy, loaded, final. Evelyn excused herself and returned to her room, her step steady, her heart surprisingly light. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew the story was hers to tell now. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope. The day after the meeting, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Claire disappeared for hours, only her car keys and the distant slam of the front door announcing her exit. Mark walked through the rooms as if waking from a long sleep, pausing at family photos and standing in the doorway to Evelyn's room, a question always on his lips but never spoken. Evelyn, meanwhile, set about her day with a renewed sense of purpose. She called her attorney, updating him on everything that had unfolded. She reviewed the folder with him in detail at his office, and he assured her that, if needed, her documentation would hold up in any mediation, or even court. "You have more than enough," he said, voice warm with approval. "This isn't just a case of elder mistreatment. It's proof of intentional manipulation and attempted financial abuse." For the first time, Evelyn felt truly protected. At home, Mark finally approached her. He stood awkwardly at her door, eyes red. "Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner?" His voice was small, wounded. Evelyn met his gaze. "Because you loved her. Because I wanted to believe she could change. I didn't want to destroy your marriage, only to defend myself." Mark nodded slowly, regret settling into his shoulders. He apologized again and again, for his blindness, for believing Claire's half-truths, for not standing up for his own mother sooner. "I'll make it right," he promised. But nothing was easy. Claire returned that evening, pale and jittery, refusing to look at Evelyn or Mark. She locked herself in the bedroom for hours. Later, Evelyn heard the harsh, muffled sound of Claire sobbing. Her armor of perfection finally cracked. Over the next week, the household changed in small but telling ways. Mark insisted on returning Evelyn's photos and keepsakes to their proper places. He offered to take over the family accounts, scrutinizing every transaction. The house cleaner, feeling the shift, returned to her original duties, dusting Evelyn's room with extra care. Neighbors who'd seen the police car, called once by Claire in a last-ditch attempt to paint Evelyn as unstable, quietly offered support. "If you need anything, just knock," one whispered at the mailbox. Claire's power melted away with each passing day. Her phone calls to friends became brief and clipped, her laughter missing its practiced lilt. The isolation she tried to impose on Evelyn now pressed down on her. Evelyn, for her part, refused to gloat. She tended her garden, baked bread, and even invited Mark to join her for evening tea, a ritual they'd lost years ago. At the kitchen table, he confessed his fears, about the future, about the marriage, about his own failings as a son. Evelyn listened with quiet grace. "You were deceived," she said. "But you are not lost. Life did not return to what it had been. Some wounds ran too deep." But each day Evelyn stood a little straighter, reclaiming not just her space, but her dignity. She knew the reckoning wasn't over. But the balance of power had finally shifted. And the house, her house, felt like home again. The house was quieter than ever, the echo of recent battles hanging in the halls. Claire now moved like a ghost, avoiding Evelyn and Mark. Her once bright confidence faded to a nervous hush. She no longer arranged family meetings, and she stopped dictating the shopping or redecorating. The sense of control she had once wielded was broken, replaced by a wary, brittle defensiveness. Mark tried to keep the fragile peace. He spent more time at home, helping Evelyn fix the old porch swing, sharing simple meals, driving her to the pharmacy. He spoke often of his regret, but more often he listened, letting Evelyn's stories fill the silences. For the first time in years, he seemed to want to know her again, not just as his mother, but as a woman who had survived betrayal and loneliness and still stood tall. One afternoon, while Claire was out, Mark and Evelyn sat on the porch with tea. He broke the silence. "What will you do now, Mom?" Evelyn thought for a moment. "I'll stay. This is my home. I intend to live in it, not just exist." He nodded, relief in his eyes. "I want you here. The kids do too. Claire," he hesitated, the pain plain in his voice. "She has to face the consequences. I don't know if we can repair what she's done." Evelyn didn't answer right away. Instead, she patted his hand. "Time will show you what's worth repairing. Don't rush to fix what needs to heal." Meanwhile, Claire tried to reach out to old friends, but her calls often went unanswered. The story of her manipulations had started to leak beyond the walls of their home. Small things, whispers among neighbors, a chill at the book club. She retreated into herself, spending long hours in her room, emerging only to eat or rush through chores with mechanical efficiency. For Evelyn, each day became a reclaiming. She cleaned her old jewelry, reorganized her keepsakes, even started attending the community center's weekly gatherings again. She shared her story there, carefully, without names, finding solidarity among other women who had endured silent wars in their own families. Mark's children began seeking her out more often. One afternoon, her granddaughter asked, "Grandma, why are there so many pictures of you in the house now?" Evelyn smiled, pulling her onto her lap, and said, "Because this is where my story began, and it's where I belong." Little by little, the house came alive again. Evelyn's garden flourished, laughter returned to the kitchen, and a new feeling, a cautious hope, settled over the home. But Evelyn was not naive. She knew peace was never permanent, not in families as tangled as hers. Yet for the first time, she was not afraid. She had proof, she had her voice, and she had rebuilt the bridges that mattered. The worst had happened. She had survived. And now, she was stronger than ever. As the summer sunlight returned, the house seemed to breathe again. Gone was the weight of unspoken accusations, the chill of daily conflict. In their place grew a fragile, authentic calm. Evelyn found herself pausing in doorways just to absorb the changed energy, her photos restored to the mantel, her garden thriving beyond the kitchen window, her laughter echoing from the living room as she read stories to her grandchildren. Mark became the steady presence she had always hoped he would be. He scheduled regular family dinners, where everyone, even Claire, was expected to sit together. The first few gatherings were tense, but Evelyn kept the conversation warm, never referring to the past, never shaming anyone. She understood that the true proof of her victory was not in humiliation, but in the reclamation of peace and dignity. Claire remained subdued. She apologized once, stiffly, in the privacy of the den. "I'm sorry for what I did." Evelyn listened, her face unreadable. "Thank you," she replied, neither absolving nor condemning. The power dynamic had shifted permanently. Claire now moved with caution, her manipulations replaced by wary distance. The children, sensing the change, gravitated more to Evelyn's side. The community responded too. Friends stopped by with flowers or invitations for tea, their eyes full of respect. Word of Evelyn's ordeal and quiet triumph traveled in subtle ways, admiring glances at the market, knowing nods at the park. She never boasted about what she had endured, but the knowledge of her strength settled around her like a shield. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Mark called everyone to the dining table. He stood awkwardly, clearing his throat. "I want to thank Mom," he said, "for showing us what it means to hold a family together, even when we didn't deserve it." Evelyn looked around, her grandchildren giggling, Mark's eyes glassy with emotion, even Claire staring at the table, silent. She felt an overwhelming sense of closure. This was her family, imperfect, messy, but finally honest. After dinner, she returned to her room and opened the battered folder one last time. She didn't need it anymore. She tucked it away in a locked drawer, a relic of the battle she had fought and won. In the quiet that followed, Evelyn sat by her window, the gentle hum of summer outside. She was not just a survivor of cruelty, she was the author of her own peace. Her seat at the table was not granted by anyone's permission. It was hers, reclaimed, proof that sometimes the quietest strength is the kind that endures, forgives, and finally, prevails.